Um, so, thank you for your presence, your interest, your curiosity in a more holistic view at living well. And I was going to say something about the previous speaker, but that will be up to her. So the name of this presentation, I think I'm going to hold this. So the name of this presentation is Art with the Whole Brain. And that happens to be the name of a class that I created and developed and I'm teaching at Avenidas, in which I was able to bring together my interests in art, the brain, and healing. So the ideas behind that came from my study, my practice, my interests, my experiences, insights, as a number of things. So I'm an artist, a studio artist, that evolved into a relational artist. And a relational artist is a type of art that brings art out of the studio, actually, more into the real world. And this is a kind of a movement that started about 20 years ago, and people are still not decided how to call this. So there are a lot of different names for it, but I'll call it relational art. I've also been an art facilitator at Stanford's Art for Health program. If you're ever at Stanford Hospital, that's a free service that everybody, also families, can make use of. So if you have to be there, see if you want to try that out. It's free. I'm also an art therapist, studied and worked in Europe and in the United States, in mental health care, also in general hospitals. Currently also in a chronic pain program in San Francisco. And I also did trainings in something called limbic coaching, nematherapy. Nematherapy is a form of art making with people that have Alzheimer's. So that's a one-on-one, very guided approach with people with brain damage. Also, autistic kids are using this. So all those things I kind of merged up in what could I do. Now, of course, I'm getting older too, so I got more interested also in brain health. I actually had epilepsy for 20 years, and from 15 to 35, and it mysteriously went away, luckily for me. But so I've always been interested in the brain, in the neurological things. But I'm not a doctor, I'm not a specialist in that sense, but I have been gathering information and experiences to bring it together into this thing, art with the whole brain. Well, before I continue to talk a little bit about the brain, I would like to ask you if you want to do two little exercises. Later it might become more clear how that fits in. The first exercise involves a little bit of lifting. You need a glass or a cup of water. And I would invite you to take a sip of water. Now, water is not only a symbol of life. In a way, it is life, because probably everybody knows that our bodies consist out of water for a fairly large percentage. And for our brain, that's even more so. The second exercise is what is called tune in. And so this is a good exercise to do at the beginning of something. And so I would invite you to try this out. For that, you need both your hands. And this is hard with the microphone in my hand, so. So both your hands, bring them to the corresponding ears. And at the top of the ear, there is the beginning of this edge of the ear that's a little bit curled. And this comes from acupuncture. There are apparently more than 140 points on the ear that connect to all kinds of parts of your body. So if you start at the top and press a little bit that top of the edge of the ear, maybe uncurl a little bit in the process, and do one point at a time, the next point next to it, press that between your fingers. Not too hard, shouldn't hurt. And move gradually down all the way. Press between the fingers. Relax, maybe uncurl a little bit. Press the next point, the next point. Now we're doing this with both hands, so this you could call a bilateral exercise. You're using both sides of the body and both sides of the brain. So here is the whole brain in action. We have two hemispheres. We'll get back to that. We're going to do this one more time, maybe two more times. Crossing the arms. This is a little bit more complicated. Again, press those points one at a time. If you can do it, don't force it. Now we're crossing our arms. We're making it a cross-lateral exercise. We'll get back to that later. From left to right, and from right to left. And if you want to, you could even do it with your arms crossed the other way. It's fairly simple. Now, when you're done with that, kind of sense if there is a difference. You might feel a little bit different. It will be different for different people. But what it does is it kind of checks you in with your body a little bit more and more present with your whole body. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain. In fact, I'm going to let somebody else do that for me. That was what the technical stuff was about. Let's see if it shows up. Some of you might have heard of this fairly well-known brain scientist. Her name is Jill Bolte Taylor. And if you look at the screens, you will see her talk in a moment. She was studying the brain, a very academic researcher person, and then one morning had a stroke. And so from the inside out had the opportunity to experience and learn about her brain. It took her about 8 years to be able to tell the story. And now she has written a book about it. It's called A Stroke of Insight. She has continued to tell her story and tell people about aspects of the brain. There's also a video up there where she talks about the teenage brain, kind of saying more about that. But we'll stay with this, and here she will tell us something about the brain. It takes about 4 minutes. And, We need some sound. Okay?
And I have brought for you a real human brain.
So she goes on to talk more about her stroke and what she experienced. She had a blood clot, I believe, in her left side of the brain, which paralyzed her right side of the body. Because the left side of the brain is connected with the right side of the body. And the left side of the brain, as she was talking about, is more related to language and talking. So after that stroke, she couldn't talk. She could hear herself making sounds, but had no idea what it meant, and nor did others that heard her make sounds. But she was kind of living on the right side of the brain, which is very much about connecting, being part of a bigger whole. And she was actually enjoying that part because she felt so connected suddenly with the world, and there was so much beauty around her. This kind of introduced her more to her right side of the brain. Of course, she didn't want to stay there necessarily, and did recover for the largest part as far as I know. And so, as you can see, she is talking about it, she can talk again, she is working again, she is writing books, speaking, and also doing art, something that she didn't do before, because she felt that represents something that I had been missing before. Now, art is a little bit more connected to the right brain. It's not so much about language or logic or analysis or things like that. Or it's more about color, about sounds, about feelings, about connecting with the world in some way, forgetting about time. Well, I'm not sure how many of you have been doing things like art, where you kind of get into a zone and you're forgetting about time. So, in our current world, there's a growing concern about things like Alzheimer's. I believe 5 million people in the United States are dealing with that. There's been a lot of research, and one of the things that came out of the research was the concept of brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. It turns out that throughout our lives, we can grow new brain cells, new connections, work out parts of our brain. This reminds me of a story of someone else who had a stroke, who was told he could never speak again, but then he realized he could sing. And so he started to sing instead of talking, and eventually got back his speech. So there was a kind of a reorganizing of connections in the brain that were still possible, and so he eventually started speaking again. So neuroplasticity, brain and plasticity, of course people are interested. How can we create new things? How can we work out our brain? There have been a number of methods developed in the last decades that use bilateral. We started with both our ears, or cross-lateral exercises, physical exercises, but also in the art therapy world. But you can think of dance and other ways that you could do some of these things. But some of the methods that apply that are actually coming from Palo Alto. One is known as EMDR. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, I believe. So that is a method that uses eye movements going from one side to the other side and back to help people process trauma. And it's actually expanded now to all kinds of issues that it's used for. Limbic coaching, also from Palo Alto, is applying some of that same thing and added some other things more for practical life coaching, somehow removing blocks that kind of get in your way in daily performance or functioning. I mentioned art therapy. Brain gym is a method that has been developed using actually the exercise we did with the ears. Is one of the brain gym exercises. They developed 46 exercises that are used a lot in schools with kids that have difficulty sitting, concentrating, focusing, being grounded, integrating new knowledge. So there are schools where they do a set of these exercises a few times a day to help kids learn. Move with Balance is a very similar approach, but more focused on working with seniors. Now, as you get older, it's sometimes harder to be in balance. Some people tend to fall more easily when they get older. So that method is working more with seniors, Move with Balance. So I have been using some aspects of these different methods in combination with art making. But let me talk a little bit about art. What is art? There's so many different definitions and opinions about what is art, and I have been thinking about that a lot, and in my understanding, art comes down, as was mentioned earlier in the introduction, comes down to a back and forth process between yourself and the world. So if you do some art, whether it's coloring or painting a landscape or drawing something, you have to always check in with yourself. You have to think, okay, what is my interest here? What do I feel like doing? What am I actually seeing? What do I want to change? That's a checking in with yourself. And you have to work with something outside you. So that could be as simple as a piece of paper or a pencil. How does this pencil feel? What kind of pencil is this? If I make a mark on the paper, what does it do? Oh, I have another pencil. Let's compare that. And so as soon as you bring something in the world through an art material or something else, you are discovering new things about the reality in which you live, and you're going back and forth. You do something inspired by some urge. You see what the effect is. You go back. How do I want to respond to that? And so in that back and forth conversation, very much like a conversation where you speak to someone, you say something, you don't know what the other person is going to say, usually. And you might not know what you're going to say next. So in that discovery, if it goes well, if you're able to sense inside and you're listening also to outside, that's where the quality in life really happens. That's where art happens in my experience and in my belief. So art in itself has a kind of a whole-making aspect to it. It makes you more whole. It brings you more in touch with who you are at that moment, what you're interested in. You might discover new things. You don't always know everything about yourself. since you change and the world changed, there's always new aspects to discover. So there is this whole making aspect of art itself, and I've been I've developed exercises that focus on different parts. So, for instance, in a class, I might say, let's draw something that you see before you. Let's think of a memory from when you were turning adult. What was a positive memory there? So there are the different things that the assignments could kind of point you to, and so connecting with different parts of yourself. It could also be imagining something, so something that you hasn't happened before, you don't remember it, but you're actually creating something new that didn't exist before. And so there are ways to help people connect with that through art. So having bilateral and cross-lateral art exercises, physical exercises before art making, doing some art making that helps connect with different parts of yourself, learning about some of the art supplies and discovering which ones you like best, that you might want to try out, learn something new, discover something new, making that connection with yourself in a non-verbal activity, mostly art making, and then following that up with getting together, sharing with each other what you experienced or drawn, have learned at your own comfort level in a more social experience, in a supportive experience. That is what art with the whole brain is about. So I would like to suggest another exercise that you can experience a little bit. Part of this art with the whole brain is also befriending yourself a little bit. A lot of people have kind of opinions about what they can do and they cannot do. As we grow older, we tend to compare ourselves with others that are very good at something, and so they must not be good at it all. They might have been discouraged to try things that are more related to art or the right brain. So being friendly to yourself is part of this exercise. Well, I'm going to ask you to see if you want to try this out. You would need a piece of paper. There are sheets of papers on the tables, yeah. We have these ideas in our head that usually is efficient. We know what we see. So now we're going to discover maybe things we didn't know so far. So choose an object to draw and spend maybe a minute to just look at it. See what you notice. What are some of the things that jump out at you? Is it a particular shape? Is it a particular color? Is it proportions? Is it highlights? Lighter, darker spots? Are there certain lines that kind of mimic each other, that like in a rhyme, there is also such a thing as a visual rhyme, where round parts kind of repeat? In classes, I might have people tell each other what they see, maybe learn from each other. Sometimes I'm asking people to use something that they already or often have with them, like a piece of jewelry or something in their pocket. Or the next step is to keep looking, but now you're going to also be moving your hand along with your eyes. So now you're going to move your hands, but the trick is, and can be hard for people, to not look at the paper. So this is not about being successful in copying what you're seeing, but it's kind of a warm-up for your hand-eye coordination. You are moving your hand along on the paper. It's not going to look probably at all at what you're looking at, but you're making a connection with your hand involved. So it's kind of like, So use a pencil and start kind of looking still, not at the paper, but at the thing that you're drawing. And move along. And you can laugh at what comes on the paper that's not important. In fact, sometimes I ask people to do it a number of times just over whatever was on the paper. It doesn't matter, that it doesn't have to be recognizable at all. This is kind of warming up a little bit your whole drawing. It's going to look funny, that doesn't matter. Sometimes it's actually quite interesting what you get on the paper. And do it again. Just draw over it and do it another time. See if you discover new things. You're still looking at your object that you're drawing. Warming up. For a lot of people, this tends to be hard to not look at the page. It's like giving up control a little bit. But it doesn't matter. It's kind of warming up a little bit. So it's going to look funny, but it doesn't matter. You're trying out this, coordinating your eyes with your hand a little bit. And so the next step is, okay, now you're going to actually try to make whatever you're drawing be related to what you're seeing. So you can now make it look like, or can try. You're going in this back and forth conversation now to having a pencil on the paper, looking at different aspects of what you're actually seeing. You can still use the pencil, but you can also, let's still stay with the pencil. And now you can look at the paper. This is an exercise of, okay, I think I know what I'm seeing, but what am I actually seeing? You might discover new things. The more you relate with something, the better you get to know it. This applies for drawing too. And so I think a lot of you are looking at their cups. And if you look at the plastic cups, there are like a number of rings on the bottom. In the middle there is like a print on it. The top sticks out a little bit. Sometimes we think, okay, something is flat on the table, so let's make that a straight line. But probably the angle that you're at, you don't see a straight line. So maybe all the curves are kind of the same curves. Maybe the curves change a little bit because of your different perspective. Some curves are closer to you than others. The bottom ones are further away. The ones on the top are closer by. It will change the circular or oval shapes. Maybe you're a little bit bored by the pencil lines. Maybe you want to be inspired by the colors on the table. Maybe different types. There are markers, there are color pencils. Maybe try, instead of this very concentrated looking at what you're actually seeing and the difficulty of translating that to paper, let's try a different approach. Let's have some fun with the colors. And normally I wouldn't do that as quickly, but just to show a different way of connecting with your materials, and maybe that inspires other things. So now you're kind of looking at your art in a different way. Maybe it becomes something totally different now. And so we are approaching the end of my talk. Actually, we're already there. And you can continue drawing or having fun with the colors or trying out things. But there are 5 to 10 minutes for maybe some questions.